There's something uncanny about modern suburbia, a stillness that feels just a little too quiet. These homes, so massive, so polished, seem to hum with energy of dreams deferred. They're built to sell safety, stability, and success, but sometimes they contain something else entirely: rage, fear, madness. Sometimes they hide a crime scene. In America, we are taught from childhood what success looks like. It's not just a job or a relationship, it's a house. Not just any house, but the right house. A lawn to mow, a nursery to decorate, a foyer where you can hang a chandelier. This ideal is carved into our collective psyche as the prize for a life well lived. And when people finally achieve it, especially after years of struggle, they're not just homeowners, they're proof that the American dream is alive. But what happens when the dream curdles? For the late 1990s and early 2000s, entire suburban landscapes were redesigned around the fantasy of more. More space, more bathrooms, more walls between family members. McMansions, oversized, overpriced, and overbuilt, became symbols of arrival. But beneath their drywall and granite countertops, many of these homes concealed something far darker than clutter or secrets. In these dream homes, some families were falling apart, quietly, completely, and no one noticed until it was too late. Because these houses, these cul-de-sacs, were designed not just to shelter, but to shield, to isolate, to stage a performance of perfection that no one dared question. Not the neighbors, not the church group, not even the victims themselves. Today we're going to walk through these open concept corridors and peek behind the plantation shutters. We're going to look past the double vanities and vaulted ceilings to the pressure that built them. And in doing so, we'll discover a pattern. One as chilling as it is heartbreaking. This isn't just a story about architecture, it's a story about image, isolation, and the terrible cost of appearances, because sometimes the prettiest house on the block is hiding the ugliest secret. This is the story of McMansions, murders, and the myth of the perfect family. Chapter 1: The Rise of the McMansion. Before the sirens and the crime scenes, there were blueprints and open houses. The 1990s and early 2000s were a golden age for American suburbia. The Cold War was over, interest rates were low, credit was easy. Developers worked overtime to meet the demands of the merging middle class, hungry not just for homes but for dreams, the kind you could tour on weekends and finance over 30 years. And what they built wasn't just shelter, it was a spectacle. Enter the McMansion. Coined as a tongue-in-cheek insult, the term McMansion describes oversized, overstyled, mass-produced houses with little architectural coherence. One might have Greco-Roman columns, Palladian windows, and a Spanish tile roof, all on the same facade. Built rapidly by national developers, these homes ballooned in size while shrinking in taste. But their purpose wasn't beauty, it was aspiration. These homes signaled arrival. You've made it. Never mind that you were living 2 counties outside the city, or that your mortgage was more than half your income. The granite countertop sparkled. The whirlpool top could fit 4. And the neighbors, they looked just like you. The housing boom of the late 1990s was fueled by deregulation and growing ideology of more is better. The American dream wasn't just about owning a home anymore. It was about owning the biggest one on the block. For many, especially middle-class families, this meant stretching beyond their means. Mortgages ballooned, second incomes became essential. The home, once a refuge, became a battlefield of financial strain. And while the front of the house projected success, the back told a different story. Behind every double garage door was a woman expected to embody 1950s ideals with a 2000 schedule. Stay-at-home moms juggled Pinterest-worthy birthday parties with anxiety attacks. Working mothers faced the guilt of not being present enough in a home they'd barely had time to enjoy. The pressure to perform domestic bliss was omnipresent, on school playgrounds, at book clubs, and eventually online. Meanwhile, men were saddled with the unspoken burden of provision at all costs. For many, this meant longer hours, mounting debt, and an internalized fear of failure that could curdle into resentment or despair. A 2005 study found that men in high-income suburban areas reported significantly higher levels of stress and emotional burnout than their urban counterparts. But who could they tell? Vulnerability had no place in the master suite. The homes themselves didn't help. Though spacious, they were emotionally barren. Floor plans emphasized isolation. Separate wings for children and parents, offices for him, craft rooms for her. Kitchens became showpieces, not gathering places. The very architecture reinforced division, each person with their own room, their own screen, their own echo chamber. Architects and critics began to notice. In 2003, architecture critic James Howard Kunstler called McMansions the visual expression of the unfettered consumer appetite. They weren't designed for community or comfort. They were built to project power, bulk, height, square footage. The message was clear. You don't need to be happy, you just need to look like you are. But that illusion came at a price. Many of these homes were built cheaply, with little attention to quality. Roofs sagged within a decade. HVAC systems broke. Energy bills soared. Neighborhoods designed around cars, not people, led to sprawl and social isolation. And when the 2008 housing crash hit, these bloated properties became obsolete. Families found themselves in upside-down mortgages, unable to sell, unable to leave. For some, the house they fought so hard to get became the prison they couldn't escape. This was the dream, repackaged and resold, a fantasy of luxury fed on insecurity. You could never relax because the next phase of perfection was always just one renovation or one breakdown away. And the result? Communities filled with strangers who waved from driveways but never really spoke. Couples who hadn't shared a bedroom in years. Children raised in rooms designed for Instagram, not intimacy. The McMansion wasn't just a house, it was a house of cards. And when it started to collapse, the fallout was more than financial. It was personal, it was psychological. And in some homes, it turned fatal. Chapter 2, Domestic Violence in a Dreamscape. In Suburbia, violence doesn't always look like a bruised face or broken window. Sometimes it looks like a perfectly manicured lawn, a Lexus in the driveway, a wreath on the front door that changes with the seasons. That's the danger of the dream. It's built to look pristine, even when it's rotting from the inside. Domestic violence doesn't discriminate by zip code, but its camouflage is especially convincing in affluent neighborhoods. The bigger the house, the easier to hide. Wealth, space, and social status create a buffer of silence, and for the victims, especially women, the silence can become suffocating. Take the case of Jennifer Corbin, a preschool teacher and mother of 2 found dead in her upscale suburban home in 2004. She was discovered with a gunshot wound to the head, and for a moment her death was labeled that she took her own life, but her husband, Bart Corbin, a well-known dentist, was later charged with her murder. It wasn't the first time a woman close to him had died under suspicious circumstances. Jennifer had been seeking a divorce. She was also exploring an emotional connection online. Something to Bart might have represented not just betrayal, but the unraveling of a carefully constructed facade. And that facade is everything. In communities like these, appearances are currency. Women are expected to maintain a certain image, glamorous but modest, domestic yet empowered, endlessly supportive but never too loud. It's a balancing act performed in yoga pants and designer heels, and for many it's exhausting. There's a name for the phenomenon, golden handcuffs. It's when the trappings of wealth, nice schools, luxury cars, the latest iPhone are used to keep someone in place. Many women in tumultuous relationships are financially trapped. They might like a 5-bedroom house, but they don't have access to the bank account. They might drive a luxury SUV, but they have to ask for gas money. They might smile at a neighborhood barbecue, but they're afraid to go home. In this world, luxury can become a leash. The story of Donna Zhu offers another eerie window into suburban deception. Though not a case of intimate partner violence per se, it exposes the way predators can thrive in environments that appear safe. Donna was a brilliant college student who disappeared in 2007 after meeting a man online and traveling to his home in a well-kept neighborhood. The man, John Stephen Burgess, had a long history of violent crimes. He later admitted to her death but claimed it was accidental. Her body was never found. The media and public were stunned, not just because of what happened, but where it happened. That's the real horror of these stories. They challenge our assumptions about where violence lives. We want to believe it exists elsewhere, out there, beyond the cul-de-sac, but it doesn't. Sometimes it sleeps right down the hall. Neighbors often look the other way. Maybe they hear yelling through the walls. Maybe they see bruises hidden under the long sleeves, but denial is easier than confrontation. And in these communities, confrontation is bad manners. It's none of our business, they say. They seem like just a nice family. Police can be just as blind. Officers responding to domestic disputes in affluent areas are often less likely to make arrests. The husband wears a suit. The wife declines to press charges. The house smells like lavender and money. The reports get filed, then forgotten, until it's too late. And all of this is made worse by the cultural policing of femininity. Women are taught explicitly and implicitly that their value lies in their ability to maintain harmony, to be emotional glue of the household. So when abuse happens, they often blame themselves. Maybe they weren't patient enough, sexy enough, good enough. But perfection is a cage. And in the McMansion era, the bars are gilded. Even in moments of clarity, when a woman does attempt to leave, the obstacles are immense. Divorce means scrutiny. It means a fall from social grace. It means gossip at the school pickup and side eyes at the country club. For many, the fear of judgment eclipses the fear of violence. And so they stay and smile and stage the fantasy until one day the fantasy turns fatal. Because when everything is built to look perfect, we stop asking what's real, and the most dangerous thing you can do in a neighborhood like that is believe the photos. Chapter 3. Perfection as a performance. In the suburbs, every family is a brand, and every home a stage. The early 2000s gave rise to more than just oversized houses. They gave rise to a digital mirror. Facebook launched in 2004, and almost overnight, personal lives became public content. A child's first steps, a family vacation to Disney, a gleaming kitchen renovation, all filtered through the glowing lens of a performative happiness. For suburban families, this was a gift and a trap. Suddenly, it wasn't enough to be a good parent or a partner. You had to look like one, and not just to your neighbor across the fence, but to hundreds online, friends, co-workers, and high school acquaintances. Your home wasn't just a place to live. It was a set for your life, a carefully curated backdrop of staged authenticity. Birthday parties became Pinterest competitions. Christmas cards were sent with professional photography and color coordination. Kitchens gleamed not from use, but because they were props. Every detail from the mudroom cubbies to the flower beds was another line in a silent script. We're fine, we're happy, we've made it. But behind the smiling selfies, something darker often simmered. Psychologists refer to the phenomenon called suburban shame, a kind of emotional suffocation caused by the dissonance between the life you portray and the life you're living. You've got the house, the kids, the job. You should be happy, so why aren't you? That internal question festers in silence because admitting the truth, admitting dissatisfaction, struggle, or failure is seen as a personal flaw. In a culture obsessed with winning, imperfection becomes taboo. This pressure doesn't just fall on women, though they're often its most visible victims. Men, especially those cast as the providers, carry their own quiet burden. When the bills pile up or the marriage unravels, they don't just feel stress, they feel shame. And that shame, left to rot, can become dangerous. In the most extreme and tragic cases, the pressure has led to what experts call familicide, when one family member, almost always the patriarch, kills their spouse and their children before taking their own life. It's a horrifying phenomenon, and while rare, its patterns are disturbingly consistent. Financial strain, perceived loss of control, and desperate need to maintain an image even in death. In 2008, an executive named Irvin Lupo faxed a note about taking his own life to the local news station before killing his entire family in Southern California. He'd recently lost his job. In the note, he wrote that society had failed them, but beneath the societal commentary was something else, a refusal to face collapse. If he couldn't be the man he was supposed to be, father, husband, and homeowner, then none of it could survive. The media is often baffled by these stories. They lean heavily on a single chilling phrase. They seem to be the perfect family. But that's the problem. They didn't just seem perfect, they were expected to be, by their neighbors, their social networks, and themselves. And then there's the house itself, always looming in the background, the polished floors, the granite countertops, the family room where no one really sits. These aren't just scenes of domestic life, they're symbols. And when the life ends violently, the house becomes a tomb for the performance. We live in a culture where aesthetic is often mistaken for truth. A happy couple on Instagram must be happy. A big house must mean stability. A smiling family portrait must mean love. But images lie, and in suburbia, those lies are often beautifully lit and tastefully staged. This obsession with perfection doesn't just hurt those who fail to achieve it. It hurts everyone. It isolates, it exhausts, it creates a world where vulnerability feels like weakness, and reaching out for help feels like defeat. And when that illusion finally breaks, it doesn't do so quietly, it shatters. Because suburbia doesn't allow for messy endings, so when they come, they are spectacular. The police cars, the news vans, the headlines, and the neighbors standing on the sidewalk repeating the same stunned mantra. But they seem so perfect, as if that was ever a reason to be safe. Chapter 4, Crime Scenes in the Cul-de-sacs. There's something uniquely chilling about seeing a line of police tape flutter across a white picket fence, a crime scene nestled between matching mailboxes and ornamental trees. because when the violence erupts in suburbia, it violates more than the law, it violates the fantasy. Some of the most infamous family murders in American history happened in these carefully curated neighborhoods. Each one left behind more than grief. They left behind haunted architecture, homes forever stained by the horror they once contained. Take the Andrea Yates case in 2001. Her Houston home was a quiet beige rectangle in a sleepy subdivision. Unremarkable in every way, but inside Andrea, suffering from severe postpartum psychosis, drowned her 5 children on one of the bathtubs. The case made national headlines not just because of the tragedy, but because of the setting. The house, with its monogrammed towels and Sunday school flyers on the fridge, became a macabre of contradiction, a temple of motherhood turned into a site of unthinkable loss. Then there's Chris Watts, perhaps the most surgically perfect example of the suburban nightmare. In 2008, Chris murdered his perfect wife Shanann and their 2 daughters in their Colorado McMansion. The home, what had been a stage for countless Facebook videos and family bliss, became a tomb. Surveillance footage captured the final moments of routine, the garbage door opening, Chris backing his truck into the driveway, the girls likely already gone. The entire world watched, horrified as the image of the all-American dad crumbled into something predatory and cold. And we can't forget John List, whose 1971 crimes echoed decades later. A devout Lutheran and former accountant, List lived with his wife, mother, and 3 children in a 19-room mansion in Westfield, New Jersey. One day he methodically shot each member of his family, lined up the bodies in the ballroom under stained glass skylight, and vanished. He even turned on the lights, lowered the thermos, and wrote a 5-page confession explaining how he didn't want his children to grow up godless. He wasn't caught until nearly 18 years later. What these cases share isn't just brutality, it's the eerie contradiction between setting and act. We expect violence to look chaotic, messy, urban, but these crimes happen in homes where everything appeared under control, where the flower beds were tended and the holiday lights were perfectly strung, where the neighbors still say, "I can't believe it. They were such a lovely family." That disbelief is a kind of cultural dissonance. We've been taught to trust the visual cues of prosperity, a large home, polite kids, matching pajamas. When a crime erupts in that setting, it exposes a deep psychological wound in the American psyche, that maybe appearances mean nothing, that maybe the dream is just a very expensive mask. The media leans into that shock. These cases get endless airtime because they seem to contradict the narrative we've all internalized, that success insulates, that good neighborhoods are safe, that white-collar fathers don't do that, but they do. And when they do, the press feeds on the contrast. News anchors walk viewers through open-concept kitchens. They point to the nursery. They play home videos on loop. How could this happen? They ask. But that's the wrong question. The better question is, why do we still believe it couldn't? The homes themselves become haunted. The Yates house was demolished. The Watts home sat vacant for years, unsellable, despite the booming market. The List mansion, after sitting empty, was eventually destroyed in a fire. These homes carry an aura. Realtors downplay, rebrand, or bulldoze. But the memory lingers, especially online, when true crime fans Google addresses and scour Zillow for signs of darkness. They become modern folklore, American Gothic for the age of Instagram. One neighbor of the Watts family once told a reporter, "It's not just that they were murdered, it's that it happened here in this house. It makes you question everything. Because if the safest house on the block can hide something monstrous, where does it leave the rest of us?" And that's the real horror, not just the murder, but the mirror. These homes reflect back on our own fears, that we don't really know our neighbors, that love can turn, that beneath the soft glow of suburban porch lights, anything can happen, even murder. Chapter 5. Aftermath haunted by normalcy. When the crime scene tape comes down, the house remains. The front doors replaced, the carpet cleaned, the listing rewritten with phrases like spacious layout and motivated seller. But for those who know, the house is no longer just a house, it's a vessel, a tomb wearing a fresh coat of paint. What happens to a home after it becomes infamous? In many states, sellers are not legally required to disclose violent death unless directly asked. Some homes linger on the market for years, like the Watts family residence, which bank officials struggle to unload long after the bodies were removed. Others are razed entirely, like the Yates home in Texas or the DeFeo house in Amityville, a case so mythologized that it transcended reality and birthed a horror franchise. True crime tourism thrives on the ghoulish fascination. Addresses are shared in Reddit threads. Google Street View becomes a portal to stare at the mundane face of tragedy. Some visitors leave flowers, others snap selfies. It's a digital age pilgrimage. Grief meets curiosity, ritual meets voyeurism. But the communities left behind, moving on, is complicated. Suburban neighborhoods neighborhoods aren't designed to hold grief. They're built to deflect it. There are no moments, no spaces, no mourning, just the pressure to resume normalcy, to keep the lawns mowed and the block parties scheduled, to erase the past through repetition. In truth, the aftermath of these crimes ripples far beyond the headlines. Children lose friends, teachers attend funerals, first responders carry trauma that never makes the news. Neighborhood watch groups tighten. HOAs panic about failing property values, and slowly, quietly, the community changes. For the families that remain, there's often an invisible weight, PTSD without a name. In neighborhoods already overbuilt, undersourced, even one violent event can create a stigma that lowers home values and accelerates decay. Empty homes breed suspicion, foreclosure spread like rot, and what once a dream development becomes a ghost town in slow motion. Beneath all of this is failure, not just of individuals, but of systems, of mental health care that is expensive and stigmatized, of financial education that's practically non-existent for working families navigating mortgages they can't afford, of a culture that ties self-worth to home ownership, family performance, and silence. Many of these tragedies could have been prevented with better access to therapy, with more honest conversations about death and domestic stress, with spaces where people could say, I'm okay, without losing everything. But we don't build our suburbs that way. We build them for visibility, not vulnerability. And so the cycle continues, another crime, another shocked neighbor, and another listing quietly update. Until then, the homes stand like mausoleums to an image we can't stop worshipping. Perfect on the outside, hollow within. The white picket fence was never just wood and paint. It was a promise, a boundary line between chaos and control, between the harsh realities of the world and the quiet, curated calm of suburban life. But as we've seen, the calm can be deceiving. Sometimes what lurks behind white picket fence isn't peace, it's pressure. It's performance, it's pain disguised as perfection. The perfect family has become both a cultural currency and a curse. We spend our lives trying to look the part, matching outfits, holiday cards, granite countertops. But the more we chase the image, the further we drift from the truth. And in that widening space between appearance and reality, something festers. Today, the illusion lives on, not just in cul-de-sacs, but on screens. Influencer families sell the same fantasy our parents bought in the 90s, only glossier and more algorithm-friendly. HGTV tells us we need an open floor plan to feel connected, as if knocking down a wall could fix what's broken. The hustle economy demands we monetize every square inch of our lives, our homes, and our children, even our marriages, until we're left wondering who we are without an audience. But the American dream wasn't always about display. It was supposed to be about dignity, about security, about having enough. Somewhere along the line, we replaced that with the pursuit of more square footage, more likes, more layers to the mask. So what if we reframe the dream? What if success wasn't measured by mortgage size or family aesthetics, but by honesty, safety, and connection? What if we allowed ourselves to be imperfect out loud instead of bleeding in silence behind closed doors? Because the cost of the current fantasy is too high. It's measured in missed cries for help, in marriages stretched thin, in children who learn to smile on cue, and in the homes that stand like monuments to everything we refused to see until it was too late. So the next time you find yourself admiring the clean lines of a new development or scrolling through a family's polished Instagram feed, pause, look deeper, ask yourself, what did they sacrifice to look like they had it all? And more importantly, what are they still sacrificing just to keep the lights on? And it is creepy to think about all those cases, especially the Chris Watts one. That one really creeped me out for some reason. It still kind of resonates. Just hard to think that someone would do that. Anyways, let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.